one thing that we've started doing at the beginning, just as a conversation piece,
Mhm.
is like strong opinions or like hot takes type things. I don't know if I have one really quickly, but is there anything like in the industry or something relevant that you're like super opinionated about?
Um, oh, dang, I don't have any like hot takes. I know like probably Theo would have like 5 hot takes in his like
I
pocket and
know
just throw
it's
them out.
ready.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I guess like um, you know, the virtual DOM is not slow. I guess.
Okay. And that'll be obviously something we can dive more into. And I don't like it's funny how there's the whole conversation about the virtual DOM that I think I understand at a very high level, but it is really interesting
Mhm.
how much you can use something and know very little about the actual details, which like going in and building an alternative that like speeds it up, which you've done, which we'll talk about,
Mhm.
is that much more impressive because you go beyond the things that like mostly I don't have to care about, right? Like I can just use
Yeah.
React and not really know what the virtual DOM is. I just know that it works for what I'm trying to do. So it's cool when people go like extra beyond into the details and get to make either informed decisions about what's there or end up like creating your own alternative, which is where you are.
Yeah, for sure. And like to be completely fair, like um React is pretty fast already. Like, I mean, for most
Mhm.
websites, you'll be okay. Sometimes you hit like if you're on a slow device or slow network, or you have like for some reason you have 10,000 rows in a list, then those are some edge cases where React can be slow.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, it's all about it's interesting when people bring up like performance because performance never matters until it does. And it's
Exactly.
good to like figure that out, right? But
Mhm.
I don't know. I had so here's maybe a little bit of a hot take to get your opinion on. Someone
Okay.
kind of mentioned the idea of like going from React back to vanilla JS, and my response was like, I don't have a reason to build anything reasonably substantial without a framework of some sort. And this was the original post was about React, and my point was not like I will always use React. Like I'm open to anything else, and there's lots of other frameworks that have other optimizations for
Yeah.
specific things, but definitely optimize for what you're doing. But I would never, other than just like a basic landing page, I would never go back to just building something with vanilla JS now, just because
Mhm.
frameworks take care of so many of the things that I would have to do anyway, that I might as well take advantage of that.
No, yeah, exactly. The apps you build are very complex now. Like the constraints and requirements are often like not very manageable in vanilla JS. So I agree with you. Frameworks are a good way to go for modern web apps.
Yeah. There was several people jumped in with like, if I'm building like this little snippet, like a
Mhm.
plugin for something, I would use vanilla JavaScript, which again, totally understand.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's definitely use cases, and I think most people were addressing not building a like fully fledged application. They were more building something that falls into the other categories that I think make sense. Um, anyway, so yeah, I thought it was really interesting. There was a lot
Yeah.
of I didn't think it would be as controversial as it ended up being, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel like this is just like an area of like use what you need, and everyone has different experiences
Yeah,
and backgrounds and
yeah,
expertises, and they just have different opinions on that.
yeah, absolutely. And I would never like if people are building stuff with vanilla JavaScript and that works for like fantastic.
Yeah,
That's just not the route I would go down personally.
totally.
Um, Got a few people hanging out with us, on Twitch, Earl George on Twitch. What's up? I would say good morning. Earl maybe has that. I don't know what flag that is. I was gonna say maybe Swedish, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Northern Chimp on YouTube. Welcome everyone. React without the virtual DOM. We'll get into that. I'm excited to learn. I enjoy. I kind of mentioned this earlier. Like, I never have a reason to go super deep into React
Mhm.
or other frameworks and how they work for the most part. But I do enjoy technical conversations around that stuff and specifically learning, which I think will be a good opportunity for me and most likely everyone that is listening in. So if you're
Yeah.
ready, um, I'll do a welcome intro. I'll play the music, and then I'll officially welcome you on and let you do your intro, and then we'll just kind of go from there. If anybody in the chat has questions, comments, leave them in there. I'll pay attention to that and try to bring those up when they're relevant and make sure we get all that stuff addressed along the way as well.
Mhm. Awesome.
Sweet. Let me go down and find. We added like sound effects in here, so maybe I'll throw in some sound effects at some point too. All right, I've got the intro ready. So if you're good, we'll start. Welcome everyone to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web development and design. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Million.js, which is the virtual DOM replacement for React.
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compressed.
What's up, everyone? My name is James Hugh Quick, and I am a developer, speaker, and teacher. And today, the solo host of the podcast, as Amy and Brad are both traveling. But we have a super exciting guest, and Aiden Bai, on the show to talk about creating and why and the benefits and all the things behind Million.js. So anyway, Aiden, welcome to the channel. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about your background?
Sure. So happy to be here. Hi, I'm Aiden. I work on Million.js. I really like performance internals of React and JavaScript. And yeah, I'm going to University of Washington, and I really like capybaras.
Sweet. Love it. Is that did you know you wanted to go to UW? Is that something you knew for several years? Just kind of worked out that way?
Oh no, I kind of like grape shot a bunch of colleges, and UW happened to be like the cheapest for the best result, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. That's cool. I went to Vanderbilt in Nashville, which is close by, which is very expensive. And I got in, but I didn't know that I would be able to go to afford it. And they meet all of displayed financial needs. So I actually had everything covered and got to go basically for free. I actually got a little money back. So it worked out really well for me.
Amazing.
But it was definitely the money has to be there to make it work type thing. So
yeah.
Anyway, there's a comment in the chat saying React can be fast, ? Which is totally on par, I think, with what we'll talk about. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your background? So you're in your first year of computer science degree. What was your background coming into it? How did you even get into the React ecosystem to realize there was a gap of hey, we could do this better differently?
Yeah, for sure. This all started because of my grandma. My grandma has a 2015 iPad. It's like a really, really old, crusty iPad. And if you know anything about old iPads or devices, they just can't load modern websites. Like when I send her a TikTok or a YouTube video, it's just, takes 20, 30 seconds to load, and the interaction performance is even worse. And so I was like, okay, if the status quo of websites, like the modern day websites, can't load on my grandma's device, who's to say it's going to load on millions of people around the world? Like, if the median device is $100 Android, who's to say these websites will actually, perform well? And when performance is a hindrance to load and interaction times, it's also a hindrance to accessibility. Essentially, as devices become better, there's going to be a disparity between devices. So basically people who are rich have faster access, people who are poor will not. Okay, I was like, what if I tried to solve this issue? And frankly, I haven't solved it yet, but this is my approach to this. Basically, what if we created tools for developers that were so intuitive that they could not resist using it, and it resulted in performance increases. And so with Million.js, what I'm trying to do is, what if we could build a React alternative that just dropped it into React? You don't have to think about it, and it improves the performance. And right now on benchmarks, it's around 70%.
That's wild. I love the phrasing of it's so easy to do that you don't have to think about it. Because I think you mentioned accessibility, like performance, like other optimizations or requirements. It's so easy for people to say no if the onboarding experience is the least bit difficult, right? You almost give them an out if it takes any amount of effort. And that's why, like, from an accessibility perspective, so many of the frameworks now like come with accessibility linting rules, and they have like call outs for you to
Yeah.
like, hey, like you can't ignore me. I'm right here. You have to do this thing to just, I guess it doesn't necessarily fix it for you, but at least calls it out. It makes it really obvious. In your case, it's even easier with like dropping in Million with React. I'm curious, maybe like before getting into that, how much
Mhm.
experience did you have with React specifically? The idea of like going as deep as you
Mhm.
must have had to go into React seems like very intimidating. So, how much experience would you say you had with React, leading into being able to make a decision to build an alternative?
Yeah, I had 0. I actually had no no experience with any frameworks at all, and so basically what I did was I looked at React internals and rebuilt React. So I have like my own React version, uh, every single hook, every single virtual DOM thing. And so obviously it took a long time. It took like a year to like figure it all out. But I basically learned React backwards. I learned
Mhm.
React by building it essentially.
Yeah. I've thought about doing something much, much smaller for a YouTube video just to kind of show how like two-way binding works, like the things that you would have to
Mm.
do in vanilla JavaScript. This is what React is doing for you. Because I think like having that understanding, which is exactly what you just went through, gives you an appreciation of what the frameworks are doing for you that you don't have to do after you're taking advantage of the framework.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously it's not for everyone, but having like this sort of approach allows you to like you understand like why the framework does certain things and like why certain patterns work. Like, okay, why does memo? I mean, memo is probably an easy example, but like, why does memo work? Or why does use effect call at this time? Or
Mhm.
like, why does my render performance is slow? Those types of things.
Yep. Absolutely. I think that is what you've done is probably well beyond what most people would do, but I think the idea of like the reverse engineering building yourself is an absolutely like amazing way to learn and really internalize. I think we kind of talked a little bit
For sure.
about college beforehand. Like I treated college like school and I got good grades, but I didn't internalize the things that I should have learned. And I really struggled with that early in my career because I didn't have like a solid foundation of understanding. I just had a GPA, and that doesn't really do very much after you actually start writing real code after, for me, after college. Um,
Mhm.
Maybe thinking about like the performance of React leading into Million.js, what was the big thing with React that you said like we could really optimize this and we could make something that's much more performant?
Yeah, my initial approach was like, what if we could make rendering faster? I mean, we have alternative frameworks that try to advertise this, right? Like Svelte, Solid, Vue, literally every framework now. But basically, like, what if we can make like having your component run and put stuff on the page or update the page faster? Um, that was my initial like approach. I wanted to figure out like how I did it, and so that's how I got really into virtual DOM and like optimizing it and making it really really fast.
Yeah, I love that. Do I know the highest level of
Mhm.
um, idea around the virtual DOM? Do you want to give people like an explanation of just from a React perspective what the virtual DOM is and how that works?
Yeah, so basically React works like this. Imagine the bottom level is the DOM, or the document object model, right? That's the stuff you can use to change the stuff on the web page. Then on top of that, you have the virtual DOM, which basically is like the bridge between React and the DOM. Then you have React on top of it, right? So when a component, let's say a counter component runs in React land, it actually returns that JSX you have. So like literally you run it, the hooks run, the whatever user effects run, and then the JSX could be like a div with the button or something returns. That JSX is put into the virtual DOM. Essentially, the JSX represents like it's like a virtual representation of what you have on your page. So like it could be a div and a button. And then you have you have like a saved previous version of that UI. It could be a div with a button with an ID or something. And so when the virtual DOM essentially compares those two versions, and you can notice that maybe there's like a difference. Once there difference is seen, it actually changes the DOM below it. And so this process is basically like you render the component, The virtual DOM reconciles it, figures out differences, and makes the changes to the DOM.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the reconciliation process is the looking at previous representation of the DOM of the virtual DOM, the new virtual represent or the new representation of the virtual DOM, comparing those, figuring out the changes. And I think you mentioned like updating from wherever the change is down. So if you have a bunch of nested components, for example,
Yeah.
and 3 levels in, you have 6 levels, let's say, whatever, and 3 levels in something changes, that means the levels 3, 4, 5, and 6 or whatever have to change to take in those new or have to be updated to take in those new changes.
Exactly, yeah. And that can be quite expensive. The way it compares like the two versions is basically it literally does like a tree traversal. If you've done like, I don't know, if you've done a CS class or like lead code, you know that like tree traversal can be slow. It's like O of n times number of levels of the tree, right?
Mhm. Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of the other frameworks. One is Svelte, which Sion in the chat is joking about Svelte now becoming React with I forget what runes, and
Runes,
it just
right?
looks a
Yeah.
lot like React hooks, etc. Do you know much about Svelte, like enough to explain the difference between like the rendering in Svelte and the performance benefits with Svelte versus React?
Yeah, I don't know how the internals are necessarily implemented, but from I can speak to Svelte 4.
Okay.
Svelte 4 essentially works, which is not the one without runes, I think.
Yeah.
So basically, it's basically what Million is doing, kind of. So
Okay.
they have like a create phase and update phase, which Million also does. It treats each component as like a block, which Million also does. It has like dirty checking and comparison of like props. So like imagine like automatic memo. It also has like fine grained like updates almost. So like it can like set a specific attribute if some data is changed. Million has this also. So like it's very similar to how Million is implemented. Svelte 5 is interesting because it's not out yet. I don't know how it exactly works, but from what I understand, it's similar to the solid implementation, but with extra compiler magic syntax.
Yeah. Someone comments in the chat, being overwhelmed about the amount of different technologies in web dev. I think that's totally fair. I think if people are learning, like, you kind of have to prioritize, like, learn one thing, don't worry about all the other things that people on Twitter and YouTube are talking about. It is fun to know that all these different options exist, but it is a very difficult challenge to overcome of figuring out where do you spend your time, how to stay up to date with everything, and then understanding the differences between your options because that takes like some amount of time just to get a surface level understanding to then make a choice on where to go. So
Sure.
it's cool to do like the tie-in with Svelte. And I'm kind of curious maybe to relate more of that back as you go into Million.js. But you kind of started with React. You looked at like, here, I'm going to build this. You kind of look at like, I could optimize this by doing X, Y, and Z. What are the optimizations that you are doing with Million.js? Does the virtual DOM go away completely? Do you have a different way of handling reconciliation of previous state of virtual DOM versus new state? What does all that look like in Million.js to get the performance benefits that you've talked about?
Yeah. So Million.js is a reconciliation. It optimizes reconciliation. Doesn't necessarily optimize rendering. So rendering is the process of running the component and returning the JSX. Reconciliation is updating the DOM based on the JSX. The virtual DOM is slow because it needs to diff a bunch of stuff. And the way it diffs is essentially it looks at every single node in your JSX or every single element in your JSX, and it checks with the old version. And so if your JSX gets bigger or you have a bunch of list elements, the cost of reconciliation becomes higher. And so the way Million solves this is through something called the block virtual DOM. And so I didn't create this. This is something that a previous library experimented with. But essentially, what it does is it treats the virtual DOM not as something to compare against, but rather as almost like a template. And so if you've ever like played with Mad Libs, like as a child in elementary school, we had like this Mad Lib test. So basically, like imagine like you have a Mad Lib, like you have a piece of paper. There's a bunch of words on it, and you have two versions of this. The virtual DOM compares every single word every single time for changes. What Million does, it takes like your words and figures out what could change inside of this word list and creates like a Mad Lib. And so every single time you reconcile, you just fill in those Mad Lib like slots, and then that's all you have to compare, just like whether the Mad Lib slot were changed.
Okay. So is that the ability to be more targeted at where you update? Like instead of, we talked about like levels, like if you're at a level 3, you have to go through the rest of the nested components, for example, to do DOM updates. All right, no, we're talking reconciliation. But are you saying like you're able to be more fine grained into how you handle the reconciliation process by looking at specific things and knowing these are only the parts that I have to look at?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Interesting. And that is so from the Svelte perspective, Svelte basically compiles down to like vanilla JavaScript that I think gives itself access to do similar stuff, like from the updating perspective, just go and update a property in the DOM directly.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. Million does the same, basically. Like what? So I mean, like Svelte does kind of like the Madlib thing too. It does all like I wouldn't say the compiles to raw JavaScript. Like if you look at the playground, you can see it. But basically, yeah, like you said, it updates specific attributes. It doesn't need to scan every single. It just looks at the data and compares it. Million does the same thing. Like if the data is changed, then update, right?
Cool. Someone was asking, clarify, what is Madlib? So Madlib was something you do in like elementary or middle school, and they would have like basically they would ask you up front for give me 2 adjectives and 2 nouns, and then they would have like this little paragraph with open spots to use those adjectives and nouns, and then because you make up whatever ridiculous nouns and adjectives to start without knowing what the story is, it makes for this really interesting, funny, ideally story is what the output of that is. So again, the correlation being, you have the story, the parts of the story that are not going to change, the parts of the story that can change based on the input from the user, then you can go and make those updates directly.
Exactly.
Sweet. That's so cool. What is one of the things I've always wondered is what is the actual representation of the virtual DOM? So in my head, I kind of very naively thought at some point, like, okay, if you have a virtual DOM, you convert it to a string, you have a new version of the virtual DOM, you convert it to a string, you compare. But I don't think that gives you like the fine grain, like this is the thing that changed to then go and make updates.
Yeah.
So are they just JavaScript objects and they're nested JavaScript objects like in a tree data structure? And so you like iterate through depth first or however, whatever algorithm you use and do that on both, and you compare each item along the way.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you say. It's basically just like an object. The type, which could be like a div or a button, has props, which are attributes, which could be an ID, class, whatever, and children, right? And so the children can compare even more nested virtual nodes and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And then for like the framework doesn't know what specific, not every component is going to have, or DOM element is going to have the same property. So for a div, you might have an ID, you might have a name, you might have an on-click handler, etc. So I'm assuming the way these are represented, like once we get down to comparing one component to another, we're having to iterate through all the properties of that component and then compare that against the property of the other component. So if you have one property here and it's not there, that's a mismatch. Vice versa is a mismatch. And then for 4 individual properties, we might also have different values that are there as well.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're able to tie just finer grain reconciliation there. And you said this is built on, I forget what the name that you said, something like block DOM. Is that what you said?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. What's the history of that? You said it was used for something else. What was that thing? Is anyone else using this, or is this like, are you kind of the only one that's taking that thing and using it for something that people may use now?
Yeah, I think so. Blockdom was originally created by someone at Udo. It's like a pretty large open source company. They're using it for their OWL framework. Basically, it tries to be a virtual DOM and also have very fast performance at the same time. And it came out around I think 2021, something like that. And so that was like a pretty interesting exploration. I actually found out through Ryan Cardiato, creator of Solid.js. Like his streams are great if you haven't seen them.
Yeah.
Also this one. But like
Thanks.
um, yeah, it's just like seeing that. So a year later, I was like, I was building like my own virtual DOM and it wasn't very successful, it wasn't very fast. And so I was like, what if I tried this approach? And so I spent around 3-4 months just experimenting around with like rebuilding my own version. And then there's Million.
Okay, cool. I would imagine that there are, to be able to do what you do, are there limitations of things that you might do with React that you couldn't then do with Million? And assuming that if there are those things, those are the things that are worth sacrificing for the performance benefit.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it conceptually, like if you have like a Madlib structure, it's really good for like updating values, right? Like if you have like a very stable-ish structure with a div and an ID, and only the ID changes like every second or so, like that's gonna be really, really fast because you just update the value.
Mhm.
But what if you have two different structures? Like let's say you have a div and you change to like a crazy like image, whatever, right? So when that happens, you're creating two Mad Libs. You're creating two Mad Libs, and those are expensive, right? They're not like, I mean, relatively expensive to like creating like a sheet of paper with words on it. And so it's like you're basically you basically de-optimize. Like you can't compare two Mad Libs together. And so what happens is it just replaces the entire tree. With a normal virtual DOM, you'll be able to like notice with like all these words when you do the whole comparison, you can see like, oh no, this div is different from the image. Then we make that change, only that specific change. And so basically the block virtual DOM is slow when structures aren't stable, or the structures inside the tree aren't stable.
Yeah.
But it is really fast when they are.
Okay. And what is, like, if I'm writing code, what does that look like for me to keep in mind or to avoid so that I continue to get those benefits?
Yeah, for Million, you don't have to think about it at all. So we have automatic mode, which tries to make all those decision making for you, right? So like evaluates the trade-offs, it tests it real quick, does static analysis to make sure like, okay, we're not hallucinating, like this makes sense to optimize. And then it goes ahead with it if it makes sense.
And this is the way this works. Like, for someone to use this, is they have a React application and they're just adding on Million. It's not like you start with Million from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. The integration process is really easy. I mean, it's literally npx space Million, and then you're up and running with
You're there.
any React application.
Nice. And I was looking at your Twitter. So going back to you talking about how that process works. So on your Twitter, I think one of your pinned tweets, which has almost 1 million impressions, which is wild, is just a
Mhm.
video of, I think, running that same command. And then it just shows, it lists out the component in a really nice, like, animated with color way. It looks really good. And it shows like performance benefit, or like percentage performance benefit or whatever for each component. So you've got your React application, you run that command. Can you talk a little bit more about how that static analysis works? Like, that's kind of mind blowing to me, of being able to not
Mhm.
just see that there's performance benefit, but like statically being able to analyze it and specifically understand which pieces of this thing we're going to be able to optimize more than others to be able to get that number. So what does that static analysis look like?
Yeah, at its core, it's just a Babel plugin that looks at like the abstract syntax tree, basically like the tree that forms your JavaScript code. And so it's mostly just about like, so what we do is we go to a component. If we see it's a component and returns JSX, we say, okay, this is a component. Then we go straight to the JSX and we see like how many elements are there compared to expressions, conditionals, whatever. Like basically like it evaluates the dynamism to the staticism. If there's more staticism, then it means it's good to optimize. And so it'll calculate like a figure, like 40%, 30% of how much static is there to dynamic, and it presents that as a speed boost.
Cool.
Obviously, like in practice, it's like not necessarily you'll see even notice it, but like that is what it tries to do.
Cool. Yeah, that's super cool. And I think you've just now coined the term staticism versus dynamicism, which is pretty awesome. Does that mean like you kind of mentioned the idea of the block DOM not being as performant as it could be if you're completely switching types of elements, for example. So if I have a lot of React that has a lot of conditionals, maybe based on authenticated state, like some sort of authentication state, and I'm saying if authenticated, show this. If not, show something else. Are those the types of big changes that maybe are still more performant, but less performance gains than if it was less dynamic? Is that fair?
Yeah. So what happens there is we either, if it really doesn't make sense, then we just say like React take over. So like you could have a parent component that's rendered in a block, and then you can have a child component that's rendered in React, and a child inside that rendered in Million. So like basically like it will defer the minimal amount of code that it needs to React if it's more performant that way. But it does have some conditional support. Like if you have like a ternary or biconditional statement that is loading null and then something else, basically it can optimize that. It just like splits it into two branches essentially.
Okay, very cool. There's circling back from a question in the chat. You initially kind of talked about performance on low devices, and I meant to call this out of like that's the perfect use case of why people care, because with accessibility, it's one of those things where when I don't have any accessibility limitations or requirements, and I don't know anyone directly that does, it's super easy for me, just people in general, to ignore it because they don't see the impact.
Exactly.
And so you were able to see the impact with your grandmother of like, this is a very poor experience. I want to help change that. So the question is kind of bringing this back to primary use case of this is because this is going to be so much faster. And I don't know if there's like memory implications of that as well, or just processing, but it's going to make it faster to load on those devices. Is there memory and or like how many execution cycles or something, like how many cycles you have to run through to do the same amount of calculation?
Yeah, so I think one of the team members just posted like a in-depth like memory analysis of this. It should be it's around 28% higher for React. No, wait, sorry. Around 303% higher memory usage for React compared to Million on a benchmark. So not necessarily reflects real performance, but and it's around 70% in terms of actual like painting the page really, really fast on a benchmark.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. It's always really interesting to me as well. You would think that, you know, if we could load a site 5 years ago on that iPad, and I have this question all the time and it drives me crazy. If we could load that site 5 years ago on the iPad, why are we not able to load the same site or seemingly the same site on that same iPad 5 years later? But a lot of the reality is we're just continuing to ship more JavaScript for the things that we do, or we adopt frameworks that have trade-offs that some of the way they handle things are slower, which means even though it kind of looks like the same website, what goes on behind the scenes is taking up more resources on a device that has less resources than it used to, and you're able to actually see that effect now.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, like over the past 10 years, we've doubled the amount of JavaScript we ship. I believe it's like 10. I don't know how to figure, but like it's doubled. And so Million doesn't necessarily solve that. I think it could eventually, but like bundle size is not like necessarily like a difficult issue to solve. I think like as long as you do code splitting correctly, you implement solutions maybe like party town for third-party scripts, you can't optimize like e-commerce sites have done this. Like you can't optimize the JavaScript set to pretty low, and like don't use Next.js, maybe use Astra or something. But like, which quick plug, check out James's Astra course if you haven't seen it. Yeah, just like choose better tools for that. But like rendering speed is a pretty unexplored issue, especially like if you're able to provide rendering speeds to users at a very low migration cost.
Mhm.
Like this is like why people are really pensive about switching to like Svelte or Solid. I mean, people switch to Svelte, not I don't think because of performance, more so it's like a great authoring experience. But like Solid.js, it's like hard to switch because it's just completely different. It's you have to change your entire workflow for maybe a performance gain you might never see.
Yeah, that it's funny. I actually had this argument, maybe debate, I don't know, like specifically around that exact same point of I use Svelte not because of performance, because I tried it and I love the stuff that it has built in and I love the syntax. In theory, the performance is there, but I've never done benchmarks on anything to like really gauge what's the huge difference if I were to build something in React versus Svelte. And then also what's the impact of that, because you don't care about performance in my mind until you actually see like there's an impact. And now we need to make some,
Exactly.
I mean, you can try as much as you can beforehand, but to a certain point, you kind of have to see the pain point to then be able to address it. And people were saying a bunch of details about like what Svelte does and how it optimizes. And
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, I'm like, I don't care yet, but I think the really cool thing that you're able to do is to address that in a way that doesn't take people out of their normal, I'm already in React, now I can drop this in and get performance benefits and not have to still not care. I just know I have better performance because it's there.
Yeah, for
What
sure. I strongly. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
Oh, no, no. I strongly agree with you on that. Like, I don't think people switch over because of performance or because of security. Maybe for like there are cases, but like most of the time it's author experience. Like the authoring experience is just radically better or radically simpler or radically different that it like people are like will rally behind it and say this is really good.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was definitely my take. I think we haven't maybe answered the most obvious question, which is why the name Million.js? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I mean it was available on NPM. It was like super very memorable name. Um, but also it was like the intention was like, okay, what if we could make React like a million times faster? It isn't. Maybe one day. But yeah, just like um, it was nice. Later I noticed that like million could be split into like two words. So you split down like MIL split lion. And so the math like the logo is actually a snout of like a lion if you look at it properly.
Oh, I don't think I picked up on that. Oh, that's hilarious. That's so cool. There's a really interesting question on Twitch from Scion. Scion has spent a lot of time talking about Svelte. I love the question of like, do you think
Mhm.
about doing something like this for another framework? And maybe the more general question is, can you see as we have this overwhelming amount of frameworks, which is exciting but also overwhelming? Can you see
Yeah.
more potential tools going the route you've done of like, I'm going to leave React as it is as the core, but I'm going to drop in on top of it and make some changes and give benefits, et cetera. Can you see either yourself doing more of those kind of drop in packages to augment what a framework does, or other people kind of following what you've done to add additional features, benefits, et cetera, to not just React, but frameworks in general?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, there's a reason not many people have done this. I mean, Preact has done this, Inferno has, but like you have to be crazy to try to like fight React. React makes it very difficult to have like almost drop-in replacements or integrations or like just like basic stuff at all. I mean, like there's a package called It's Fine, which literally just hacks React internals in order to provide like if you're like get the element for a component. Like obviously you can use ref, but like what if you like don't want to use ref for that case? And so React is hard to fight against, and it's very unlikely that there are more. But I think this direction is a correct direction. I mean, we should see this in more dev tools, right? Like the philosophy of like, I want immediate benefits in performance, security, ease of use, whatever. But in my existing workflow, like developers don't want to change how they work. They just want benefits without any like cost.
Yeah, and just layering on the fact that we seem to have like new frameworks pop up every month, right? And I'm in a privileged
Yeah.
position of it's a benefit and it's a blessing and a curse of like I don't write production level software every day. I do content and I kind of follow the latest trends, which means I get to follow things as they come out. But it also means I'm not as deep technically because I'm just not writing like bigger production level code every day. But most
Yeah.
people don't have the ability to follow as these new frameworks come out, right? To adopt a whole new framework because code at companies moves much slower than
Totally.
what you see on Twitter. Like the reality is what the code that you write in a job is probably much different than what you see content creators like myself talk about. And so I can see the idea of like, all right, we've been investing 10 years. Is React 10 years at this point? I think it's close. Anyway, we've been investing years into React. We can keep that and we can layer something on top of it. I think is definitely a really interesting strategy, and I would love to see more of those types of tools. I think that'd be a really fun augmentation to like the ecosystem that we're in now.
Yeah, for sure. With new tools like unplugin or whatever, you can like it's really cool to be able to like distribute to almost any framework nowadays. Like just with one package we use, it just like it works in Astro, Next.js, whatever.
Yeah, super cool. On your homepage, it looks amazing. This is like one of my biggest struggles. I think one of a lot of people's struggles is like I don't feel like I'm good at doing that sort of thing. I try to change the way I talk about myself to just be like I haven't intentionally practiced a whole lot, so like it's just lack of experience. What did you build a landing page yourself? It looks great. Do you have like any design background? Like how'd you come up with that?
Yeah, actually, I have a friend who made like a webpage for a hackathon. I was like, okay, I'm stealing this template. This is mine now. So like to be completely like transparent, the base styles are all from that website. But in terms of like the styling or whatever, like it's not that difficult. I think Talon makes it really easy and accessible to create like web page. Like I suck at CSS, right? Like being able to manage a lot of context in my head is just very difficult. And Tailwind just makes it really easy to do that. So I'm not good at CSS. I'm not good at design. I just take a lot of time. Like I spend hours just like tinkering with styles, and that's why
Mhm.
to make it like look as good as possible. It's obviously still not very good. But like I mean, I think it just takes time. I think styling and design is just a matter of time and just looking at other pages for reference.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I think that's something that we also fail to appreciate with situations like this is that it does take time, especially when you're not the most experienced in that sort of thing. And I like a lot of times I'm doing something smallish for a YouTube demo, and it's not the
Mhm.
kind of thing that I'm going to spend 40 hours going into the really small details for the demo because
Exactly.
it's not worth that amount of time. So I don't have the experience of really like sticking with one thing over the course of a long time and making these minor
Mhm.
adjustments and doing these tweaks and like really honing in on those details. Someone called out that this is running on Vercel. Typically this type of thing is like Vercel or Netlify is usually the easy answer. Any particular reason why you went with Vercel?
Yeah, I was an Netlify user for a lot of years. Um, Honestly, like it doesn't really matter. I never
Yeah.
thought this happened to have like a sponsor plan, and they had like analytics and stuff. I was like, okay, if it's free, I'll take it. Thank you.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't really care what I deploy to. I used to deploy Netlify a lot.
Yep.
But once I got free stuff, I just switched over to Vercel and have everything out there.
Cool. Love it. Thinking about like I feel like this has become really quickly what I would consider very successful from awareness. Definitely on my end on Twitter. I've seen like I first really like I had seen this on Twitter. I heard your interview on the Syntax podcast. I know you've been on several other podcasts. I'm sure you've got lots of requests.
Mhm.
What two things like from a marketing perspective, did you do anything intentional to try to raise awareness to this? Is it something that just kind of caught on? And the second thing is like, what's kind of the current state of usage and adoption? So first would be kind of the marketing aspect of it, of what all did you put into trying to share this, and how?
Yeah, I just do informational content or just like what I'm building. I think I don't have any other than like the really like over the top like you like videos like marketing videos that I post on Twitter. Like I pretty much just have like just demos. Just post like, okay, I'm building this thing. Check this out. Here's a video what I'm building. Or like I read an article on like how I built this thing, why it's important, or like for example, I wrote an article on like the blog for Kalam and like how it works specifically. And so I don't have like very intentional marketing strategies. I just say what I build, right? Like just be
Yeah, what you
authentic.
built,
Like
yeah.
this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Exactly. In terms of usage, I think we have around 10,000 installs per week. Although I don't know if it reflects actual usage. We do have like analytics on who uses our CLI. It's around 100 to 200 a day. I think some people like run and like whatever integration, and then they're like, okay, it works. It's yeah. I mean that's how it should be, right? Like hopefully.
Yeah.
It's around 13K stars. I don't know how many impressions anymore. I don't track impressions. But yeah, just like there's definitely a community of a like pretty large community now, around 2,000 members in our Discord. So just like a bunch of people are using Million. It's cool to see it. Some companies using Million as well.
Yeah.
Wise is using Million. MetaMask is in the process of integrating Million. So there's a lot of people using it. It's a little bit stressful, but it's also really cool to see people being able to have faster React websites.
Absolutely. That's so cool. I also saw like you got the scrolling logos open sourced. So the creator of open source is a friend of mine, Brian Douglas. Also, a couple of my good friends work on that team now with him. Super cool to see that name on there as well. Speaking about teams, one of our last questions as we kind of get close to wrapping up, how big is the team? So you're the creator. I assume you're like the main maintainer. This is open source, I think. Are other people contributing to it? Like who all is involved from a full-time perspective? Probably not full, because you wouldn't. I don't. Would you consider
Yeah.
yourself full-time being a student as well? So anyway, like what are the details of like who all is involved and who's helping manage all that stuff?
Yeah. So I'm mainly like doing engineering, marketing, just everything basically. I do have some like part-time team members that just like help out. Toby Loba on Twitter, he's developer from Nigeria, helps out with like DevRel. Ricardo, who helps out with like also DevRel. Mostly like we have people doing DevRel, just like doing like marketing sort of things. We have a couple like transient contributors that help out sometimes. They've been also really helpful, but yeah, mostly I'm working on the project. So like half the time I don't go to lectures, so I skip class to work on this. So it's effectively full time, I think.
One of my favorite stories, one of my most proud moments in college is my senior year. I did not go to a particular class one time, not even the first time, and I got an A in that class. And I love telling that story. And I imagine we kind of talked about this beforehand. Like if you've done the things that you've done, sure there are things that you can learn in class, but especially early on in your classes where
Yeah.
you're doing like a CS 101 thing, that stuff has got to be pretty easy for you. So I imagine it's easy to kind of step away and do stuff that's a lot more intense. Do your professors know, are they aware enough at all to know that you built this? Like, because I think most professors are often not tied into the community. They're not tied into the latest and greatest. They're not spending time on Twitter, for example. Do they have any idea that you've like built this really incredible thing?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I don't expect them to be fair.
Yeah.
Like my CS professor is using like JGrasp, which is like, I don't even know. That's
I don't
probably
know what
made
that is.
before I was born. I was like, I don't even know like what software that is. So I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, I don't expect them to know. But yeah.
Yeah. It's a really interesting thing. So I've done a lot of teaching in different capacities, and I would really love to teach on a university campus to bring a fresh perspective to what tech is, to what programming is, to what like a career in CS can be, because it's so slow. And I've worked, like I went through my CS curriculum. I've worked in education in high school and universities. It's just so slow, and those people who are teaching are often disconnected from what the industry is kind of changing to as it's changing. They're just behind. And so I love the idea for me potentially, and this would be really cool for you to do something like this too, like for you to teach a class, like I think you totally could, of like
Mhm.
modern tooling or something like that, that I think would be um a lot more exciting for people, and I don't know, give them something more to look forward to than just uh, a maze solver was the coolest thing I did in college.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Like eventually we have to learn. There's like something called Huffman coding. I have no idea what that is, but like totally agree. I think the CS classes, the content that we learn is generally it could be useful in terms of like how you think, how you like learn about things, but other than that, it's just not really useful in the industry.
Yep, absolutely. Scion commented or asked, "Is it time to reform academic content?" Yes, and that's just not an easy thing to do. Like definitive yes, but it's hard for a lot of different reasons. I have like I want to wrap up. I have a ton more questions. This has been super fun. I've really enjoyed it. Maybe one more question before we get into picks and plugs is just, what do you have like a next thing? Are there other things that you're interested in, excited about? Do you have an idea for something you want to build? Or are you just kind of continuing to work on this? Nothing, no immediate plans, just what's on your mind for the future?
Yeah, I'm building a company around performance, not around Million specifically, but like how the philosophy of like building tools that are intuitive, like basically intuitive to integrate and give immediate performance benefits. So there's this thing called GitRound by Oasis Capital, which is like a open source VC firm that uh, that has like it's basically like an open source accelerator, and so I get to build interesting things, hopefully ship some interesting products that companies or people can use.
That's so cool. I love that. I think that seems like such a perfect transition. And I'm sure you get people saying this type of stuff all the time, like just how impressive it
Yeah.
is that you're so young. I'll layer onto that, like super, super impressive. But I think that I love that you have the perspective already at that age of knowing that you have the ability to build something and kind of control. Like, I think a lot of people in college, especially, whoever recruits on campus, those are the companies that they go and work for. And they just
Yeah.
don't know that not that I'm saying everyone should work for themselves or build their own thing, but like they just don't know that's a possibility because they haven't seen it done. So I think that's super cool to call out for you, of just like looking at a situation as a developer and then saying like I could do something better or different. And that's super empowering as you go through like the rest of your journey and career. So
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, open source is great. It's awesome. I think fundamentally, Million will remain open source. He'll stay open source, but it's just like a lot of more meaningful things you can build or like experiences you can get can't be done purely through open source.
mhm. Yeah, I think so too. And there's the whole like growing a business aspect of it too. We kind of talked about this in my
Yeah.
Discord this morning. Like it's totally different when you kind of run your own company, because it's more than just the tech side. It's learning about everything. So anyway, super, super cool stuff. I'm really glad that you joined. I really love this conversation. We can move into the last section, which is our picks and plugs section. So a pick is something that you used recently that you enjoyed. Plug is going to be anything that you want to plug for yourself or another community member. And just to tie this in uh, to the chat, I will ask you the $1,000,000 question, pun intended. What is your pick and plug for today?
So I was looking at Twitter, and there's this project that was co-created by the creator Nux called tsperf.dev.
Mm.
It's really interesting to me because it's something I also want to build through my company or through Million. And so basically, from what I understand, their tagline is, we're building a suite of open source tools that help you visualize potential performance issues, detect regressions, decode compiler measurements. It's essentially like a Swiss Army knife for solving performance issues. So this is like super interesting to me.
Sweet. And I just threw the link in the chat if anybody is interested in checking that out as well. So is that your pick? Do you have a plug also, something, or was that the plug?
Oh yeah, just check out Million.dev if you want to get started with NPX based Million. Yeah.
I also really chuckled when you talked about like statistics from the CLI of like, it's basically they ran the command and there's like nothing else they need to do because of like that's how the experience is supposed to be.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Love it. For me, I will. I'm going to go back a little bit. I don't know if I'll have a link because I'm trying to get to it, so I'll kind of scroll while I am talking. But one with what do you not devices? What are they called? Like, what is a blender called in your kitchen? Like, not utilities. Oh my gosh, appliances. Thank you. Like, appliances in your kitchen. They often like you put them in a shelf or whatever, and then your cord just like drags or hangs down, and you just throw the cord like in the shelf or whatever. So Gooseman said doodads. Let's go with that one. So I found this thing that is I found it. It's a sticks on cord organizer. So you can like stick it onto the back of any appliance, and it has like little flaps that you can just wrap the cord around. So as you finish with it, you unplug it, you wrap the cord around, you put it into your shelf or pantry or wherever, and you don't have to worry about the cord like dangling everywhere, especially as you like bring it back out. It's not going to hang down. So this is super simple. These organizers, I got a 6-pack for $10. It's not super fancy, but it does exactly something that's super useful for you when you're bringing stuff in and out of your pantry. So get a link there for people that are interested. Pretty cheap, pretty easy to set up, and pretty useful. So Gooseman said saw a YouTube channel talking about this thing as the thing he likes to use. Yeah, it's to me like very undeniable that this is useful and everyone should have them. So the other thing I want to get, I haven't done this yet, is they have like little stick-on balls. So if you like for us on our kitchen counters, our cabinets come down and we like put the coffee maker underneath the cabinets, and then we have to pull it out to get the water reservoir thing out to fill that back up. So they have these little stick-on little balls so you can roll it out and not have to like drag it on your counter. Anyway, so that's another little like interesting gadget that I want for my kitchen. And then for my plug, you gave it a shout out earlier, so thank you. My Astro course is out at astrocourse.dev. Had a ton of fun working on that over the course of several months, and have gotten really good feedback. Have had really good enrollment numbers, which has made me really excited and like optimistic for creating more and more course content in the future. But if you want to learn about Astro 3 and its full stack capabilities, not just like static site generation, but also server-side rendering and other things that are really cool, you can check it out at astrocourse.dev. So, Aiden, thank you for being here. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks everyone for listening in, watching in on YouTube and Twitch. If you're listening in a podcast after the fact, leave us a rating and review to help us do more of these episodes and have on additional amazing guests like Aiden. But thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for being here, and we'll catch you all next time. Sweet. That's like the official end of the podcast. Now we're here for a few more seconds. We'll also kill the stream. So thanks everyone for watching in. I'll go ahead and end the actual stream, but we'll catch you all later.